So today we are going to chat about momentum. So behind me, Abby, Alex, and Joe from Excelis certainly recognize this as I wrote it all up the other day. So I just want everyone to witness that we had a long conversation. We're gonna rebuild a conversation we had. So I've got the blank side here so we can start fresh, because it's tough to jump into the middle of brainstorming and feel like that's organized in any way, shape, or form. So the backstory, as many of you know, we launched in 2019 when Alex and I like to say QBRs were like the weather. Everybody was talking about them. Nobody was doing anything about it. And that's when IT Nation 2019, we launched with the QBR piece. And then as everybody has grown and started doing more and more QBRs, tracking around QBRs, management of the folks that are doing QBRs, and that process led us to customer success. And really, we're always aiming to help drive better business for MSPs. So one of the first folks we met at IT Nation 2019 actually wasn't even Joe. It was Joe's wife. And so I've asked Joe and Allie and Abby and Alex, I just combined Abby and Alex into Allie, to join us today, because we've had this conversation a couple different times, and they have evolved their process and done a lot of it through Lifecycle Insights, and they have some ideas too about even how to continue it. So I would like each of them to kind of share their piece in the evolution, and then we want to brainstorm with folks the ideas that we've come up with to see kind of some next steps along the way. So I'm going to pass it over to Joe, since that's where our story starts.
Well, thank you very much, Marty, and I appreciate the time, and I hope I don't let you down here. I'll say that it's been a blast going along this journey with you, but I'll cut to the chase. Yeah, as you said, 2019. At the time, my wife and I were both at IT Nation, and I'll tell you that we were walking the floor, and all of a sudden, my wife comes up to me, who does our financials, and she says, "Do we do QBRs?" And I said, "We're supposed to. I know we need to, but it's one of those things." And she's like, "Well, I just talked to this lady, and she says, like, you got to do QBRs, and they'll show you how to do QBRs." I'm like, "Oh, that sounds pretty enticing." And we literally went back to the booth and talked to some people. And Joyce actually was probably the leading driver, but we ended up signing up very early on. And that was in 2019. It took us a little while to get going. Some of the early steps were a little trying to figure out how to do it, how to convince people that we needed to do it. And it really took us probably the better part of 18 months to really engage with the team. And then we ramped up pretty quickly, probably at the end of 2021, and in probably the second half of 21, and then into 2022 was when we were really trying to recognize the value. And I'll tell you, it's been really amazing, because in the last year, through a series of intended sort of low profitability client attrition efforts, we did a lot of the hard things as it relates to understanding exactly where our revenue streams were coming from and where we were making and losing money. And the efforts of, I think we lost over about an 18-month period, we eliminated about 19 clients. And yet in 2022, we are going to exceed our top line and bottom line profitability goals, largely due to the fact of technology stack alignment and the projects and the client retention we had. And I'll say, in the uplifting of many of those clients that were at low profit models, that when we sat down, did the QBR, did the roadmaps, and explained the technology direction and strategy, they were all in and they bought into the new model, and we put them on new paper. And so the profitability on those many low profit clients went up. So the model works perfectly. I'll tell you that, for us, now we're at that point, and the reason that we initiated this conversation, because, it's kind of like first gear, second gear, third gear. First gear, second gear was getting it all together, figuring out and getting it going. We feel good about it. We're not perfect. We've still got to get better at it. But, net, now we're realizing that what's the next level of visibility that we need. And really that's what's driven this momentum idea. And it's really, I was thinking about it, it's really kind of the opposite of inertia. What we're finding is that when we have clients with high degrees of inertia, that they're not moving along with us, if they're not aligning with the tech stack, if they're not buying in and agreeing to the appropriate proposals that are being put to them on a regular basis, that are, engaging with us in a way that we can help lead the conversation. Those are our high-risk clients, and we've seen some of them slip out the door when we didn't mean it. So what we're trying to do is understand how we can work with Marnie and everybody at LCI to kind of say, okay, how do we identify, the people that are moving with us and that we've got great momentum with, but as importantly, how do we identify those that are not, and make sure we got visibility around that in mass, so we can see across all our account managers, across all our clients, where's our risks, and make sure that we're managing to that. So that's kind of where we're at with it, Marnie. I hope that summarizes kind of how we started this.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. So the first notion, I'll put the word momentum up here, because that for sure is the word that really hit as you started talking about it. And on this call a few weeks ago, maybe it was a couple months ago now, we started talking about the notion of some headlines, like what could we highlight as a notification for folks that would drive a conversation around an action to take next. So for folks that are on the call that remember that, there were already some metrics that you sort of implied in what you were talking about that we'll get to in a minute, but we're going to kind of pull those pieces together. Next, I want Alex. So Alex joined us in the booth at IT Nation to chat with folks, because Alex is in charge of the business review process, and really would love to hear your story of how you got to where you are now.
So I'll start like 30 seconds after Joe started. They came back from IT Nation, and I had just decided to become an account manager. We had service managers, which were essentially just engineers who kind of did that work sort of on the side. I don't know, it was strange, but I was an account manager, and I had no idea what we were really supposed to do or how we were going to execute it. And Joe said, "Hey, here's this thing, Lifecycle Insights. I want you to use it." And I was like, "Oh, well, on top of all the other things I'm trying to figure out, let me figure out this piece of software too. This will be great." So I really didn't look at it very heavily for at least probably 3-4 months, like at all. Like I kind of was like, okay, like I logged into it and was like, all right, there's this thing, and I don't know how I'm even going to use this. And then there was a certain point where I was holding QBRs, and they were monstrous things, or some kind of version of a QBR that it just didn't feel right. Like it wasn't hitting the right notes. It was super hard to prepare for. It just was wrong. So I leaned into Lifecycle Insights almost as a I don't know what else to do. Let's give it a try. So and really the only thing I did to start is I just started using the assessment, and just that opened my eyes hugely. That was like, wow, this is what I've been looking for. Kind of like, how do we capture all those pillars of an IT infrastructure and then present those in a way that we can have a conversation about. So I just started using that. And then LCI, as it does so nicely, also showed us all of our warts, where like I went and looked at assets, and I was like, oh my gosh, our asset inventory is terrible. And now I can't use the rest of this stuff until like the budgeting and all that kind of stuff. Like a lot of this isn't going to work until I get the assets correct. So we pulled like a sort of an all hands move to really, I mean, it's not perfect, but we have pretty good accuracy now to fix our data and make it like actually usable, and then make this, good. So we did that. And so then we started using QBRs, and we've slowly just developed it over the last 2 years, and using more pieces of it and adding it in there for the value. And I started off as our first account manager, and now I'm managing 2 or 3 other account managers. So we grew from nothing to a team.
Which is really what leads to the very next piece, because you wanted not just the process of your business reviews, but then it became the conversation around the management of the process, which I think Abby's got my new favorite expression on. I haven't quoted it yet today, because I'll let you say it first, Abby, but in the future, you will hear this from me. So Abby, I'm going to pass it over to you, because how do you like to manage the notion of QBRs? Oh, you're muted, but you knew that. There you go. Nope, muted again. Oh, you're going to make me say you're saying first. That would be a shame. I'd spoil it.
Okay, here I am. I'm sorry. I'm a Teams person. Okay, so I think, as Alex said, we've really added to the team, which has been really exciting. And we got past the point where we were like, okay, we need to do QBRs. And we got to the point where we were like, we need to do QBRs well. And like, we need to be really good at this thing, and they need to provide a massive amount of value to our clients. And so I think in 2023, we're estimating we're going to do about 200 QBRs. Which we're super excited about, but managing the process of 200 QBRs is a really big undertaking, and we need to get to the point where can manage our process by exception and not by detail. And so, we really are hoping to be able to lean into LCI to do just that, to manage by exception. Like, for what clients do we not have the right people in the room, and we're not getting any momentum because of that? What account managers are effective and what account managers are effective? How often do we really need to be doing QBRs based on size and based on spend of a client? Like, there's so many kind of variables, I think, for us, that as we really started digging into QBRs to say, like, okay, we can get really good at this and it can drive a lot of business for us if we do it correctly and manage to it. So, we started talking with Marnie and her team about like, how do we do that? How do we get to the data so that, when we're looking at a year full of 200 QBRs, we know where to put our attention, we know where to put our energy, it's well spent, and there's a return on that. Because realistically, like, Alex can't manage 200 QBRs, having to sit in all of them or dig into the data. So we need those exceptions to pop out to us. And I don't know if that was the saying. I know I've said that a lot.
Yeah,
over the
no, I
past,
do like to manage by exception. There are lots of details within a QBR, and Joe talks about before, if a client calls, to have a place where he can quickly say, like, they're green, right? I'm going to pick up this phone and not get blasted by whatever's coming, I think is also, but to have that aggregated view across clients to kind of drive toward that momentum piece. So the words that you used, and I think Joe hinted at a lot of the pieces of this, is imagine if you could score a QBR to be successful, that it was successful. So like, rate your QBR here. So one of the first things we wanted to brainstorm with folks, and we actually came up with the idea of, okay, if we need a good QBR, what are some things? Now we could rate one, right? But just because an account manager did it doesn't make it a good one, right? Just because you felt good about it also doesn't make it a good one, right? What would help define, like, imagine if you could see scores, right? A rating sheet of which were your best QBRs. So to start, let's think of a single QBR. And it was interesting because we were talking about stories of clients that we have lost, and we heard things like didn't adopt in a timely fashion. We didn't have the regular, like, we tried to have QBRs, but they weren't showing up for them. Joe mentioned the right people weren't coming to the room. So we started thinking about scoring QBRs, and we came up with a couple of ideas, looking to see if other folks have others to add. So cadence, Abby mentioned that. Are we doing the right one? So you don't have 200 clients, you're doing 200 clients across, you're doing 200 QBRs, some of them quarterly, some of them annually, some of them semi-annually.
Yeah, so we've tried to, like, based on size and spend, try to come up with a cadence that makes sense for clients. So some are annually, some are twice a year, and some are quarterly.
So cadence, the proper people in the room, right? So if you're meeting with a project manager, had a great QBR, they loved everything, but the check writer wasn't in the room, right? Probably not a good QBR because it's not making things happen. The notion of percent of recommendations accepted, and for Joe specifically mentioned based on like the core stack, right? These are our baseline principles versus maybe some ancillary pieces. And then when
I also mentioned, just as a point, like on the accepted thing, I was curious about the aging aspect of those, the percentage as well as the aging of them. Like, so, they may accept them, but if they're sitting stagnant for 6 months, 9 months, that also represents a risk.
So when we had originally talked about headlines of like giving a dashboard notification of you've got 3 QBRs complete or 3 QBRs coming up. That's only a small piece of what maybe they want to track. So would love if others had ideas of, if you had all this information where you could score a QBR, are there other elements that you would add to that? And I know I'm throwing a lot at you, so it's like, I'll wait for typing or come off mute and chat. Assessment and recommendation trending. I think that, so that would be the assessment score improving. And then again, the recommendation percent accepted. That's kind of the momentum piece, Mark. I think that we want to see it over time. I'm just looking in the chat to see if anything else pops up. So add assessment as a component.
Which, I think to speak to Mark's point, I think that assessment would naturally come along. Obviously, most of our
If the recommendations align.
If not all of them are usually tied to an assessment item. So it should, but it's a good point to track that as part of the tracking. You can certainly add into that rating score for sure.
You know what? I'm so glad you said that because I forgot the one release piece. So hopefully I know 37 of you watched the video last night when I put it out. But while you're thinking on this, I'm going to show my screen real quick to show the release piece that went out. First, if you're an auto task human, you can now budget past end of life. But second, in assessments, so this relates exactly to what you just said. When you're in an assessment, if you have aligned recommendations to the assessment, you can now choose to print that out in item detail. So there's a recommendation column that you can turn on and you'll see which recommendations they align to. So we've deleted a lot of our recommendations in our demo site this week, but that is where you can now connect the dots for folks so that now that assessment item is directly connected to the recommendation. So sorry, I didn't mean to I didn't feel like that was completely off track, but people have asked to be able to see where the assessment items were aligned already to recommendations. So that does make sense, Alex, to your point of if they're already associated, the percent of the recommendations accepted kind of improves the assessment score along the way, but could certainly add that to the piece. Is there any squishier variable where when you left a business review, you'd almost want to do your own NPS score, your own, like, how would you rate this Amazon QBR? And would you want your client to be able to? Is that a component of it, or would it truly just be metric pieces around it? I see thinking faces, which is a good. It's not in the classroom though, where I can't tell if they're looking me in the eye or not, so I should call on them. Trisha, yeah, ask him if it was valuable. I know Greg does the same thing for sure and kind of asks what to include.
Well, that was the thing that we discussed briefly also, was the idea that the scoring that could be done afterwards could be done by both the client as well as the account manager, and have that, if there are gaps, a little bit of the EOS mindset, if there's a gap between what we think and they think, that represents a risk as well.
Yeah. So our notion is to be able to look at, so we, as we were talking about this idea, sorry, I want to go back to my notes because believe it or not, we do have a plan for how we want to talk through this. Our thinking was all business reviews would maybe have objectives around this, right? We're aiming for a score that every business review we can score on. Did it hit the cadence? Are the proper people in the room, were recommendations, et cetera, are all of these pieces true? So for CSAT.
And Marnie, Trisha mentions just asking the customer if we deliver value at the end of the meeting, right? That value opportunity.
I was gonna say, yeah, I hit below the line. Okay, I got value on there too. So this would be like a global QBR score, right? We want that, but we also then talked about objectives for a single QBR. So a single QBR objective. And I feel like, Tricia, you have stated this before, where you will have client-facing objectives, but you also might have some internal facing goals, right? So Joe talked about, maybe I just want them to understand the importance of security, right? Maybe they're not going to sign all of I just want to know that their sentiment is moving in the right direction. I would love to hear some individual goals that you might, like some internal individual goals that you might try to accomplish that wouldn't necessarily be selling something. I think we know how those align to customer objectives, but what are some internal things that you might want to score a QBR against? If folks have ideas on that. I'm making kind of client facing versus internal. I'm trying to remember some of the specific examples we had.
Yeah, I think, we talked about understanding like a specific type of technology, right? Like maybe if you're making a push to go to the cloud, like, do they even understand what the cloud is? Like, do they know what that means? And like, do they understand the implications for their business or what it may be that is holding them back? Sometimes it's a specific piece of software that they're using that's just like, keeping them on-prem, and, understanding how do you use that software and how many people use it. And so I think sometimes you're having these really specific kind of business strategy conversations around technology that's just understanding their business better, so that, when you come out of that meeting and it's just same page on what roadblocks may be, or having a little bit of a path forward with some like takeaways or homework, like, oh, I didn't understand that, SaaS was an option here, and I'm going to do some homework on that to better understand if the SaaS solution fits my business. So I think, depending on where they are from a technology standpoint, you could create really specific goals for that meeting that just relate to what we know some of our roadblocks are for that particular client.
Yeah, I think the whole education piece, it moves the needle for them, right? It's sort of like in the same way in a marketing funnel, there's this whole awareness piece, right? They need to be aware of their problem before they can sell the problem. So just because you didn't sell something aligned to that objective didn't mean you didn't accomplish objective. I've got two chats. Matt said, if the content's staying at the correct level. So I think I'm trying to decide if that's internal, where we put strategic versus tactical, or if is that directly aligned to having the proper people in the room? Or the reality of it is you might get the CEO in the room and it still slips into tactical if they suddenly took you down a rabbit hole. But so they may be connected, or there may be two different versions of that. So Rafi, yeah, tech versus business. And then I have another one. Are we looking at having different groups for the QBR score, since we may have different cadence, et cetera? I just want to be able to level out average. Yeah, so I think that was sort of the next level. We were thinking of every individual QBR could be scored globally on, like, whether it's let's just rate the QBR itself for our standards, right? We've got our standards around a QBR. Is a single QBR meeting its objective? And then, well, and I'm going to come back to that one because I want to finish up the objective piece, because then we're looking at how we could run these metrics and slice and dice it. So we were thinking that to accomplish, if we wanted to try to score these pieces, there are some technical things we would need to do in Lifecycle Insights. So we would need to be able to tie a recommendation to a QBR so that you could track that it was 3 QBRs later and they still haven't agreed to turn on MFA. That's kind of that aging process piece.
But you're kind of doing, actually, because if you go into, when you do a recommendation, you can actually attach that recommendation for each assessment to that time that you went through it. So if this thing was red and I made a recommendation on it and it's still red, the next one is still red, the next one, I can tag it every time. And sometimes I don't even know if I should, like I kind of go, do I want to tag this thing 3 times or do I not? I mean, hopefully you don't have a lot of those, but occasionally you do have something that's going to be larger and long reaching, and that's an interesting. But you kind of already are tracking that in a sense.
Yeah, we've got that down
that,
in the weeds where you can go look for it, but to be able to level it up,
sure, for sure.
That like a kind of an alert.
What do you think about customer engagement?
Oh,
If they're just going, yep.
just a deer in the headlight look versus not paying
Yeah,
it.
and
They
you
check their
keep talking,
phone.
yeah, and you ask for things and you're not getting stuff back. I feel like I don't know where that would go if it's the global or even on the single QBR, but yeah.
Well, to your point, if you got the proper people in the room and you get a CSAT score, maybe in general that's global, but if you're seeing a problem, you might come down to this individual client. We're going to have to start, like, we're not getting the right people to want to have the right conversation. So how do we get them to have that right conversation? From a tactical piece on tracking toward a score, I think Alex has got a good point. We've got information around the recommendations, but if we can connect it to a specific meeting so we can score it on the meeting, right? It's back there, it's in the plumbing. The other thing we were talking about was linking strategic goals or agenda items to a QBR meeting. So, we've got goals and customer success. We want to do kind of an agenda builder. We've talked about an agenda builder, but to be able to have like a unique agenda item that's associated to track against as a high level goal. Does that make sense? I know we've talked agenda builder a couple times, just curious to level that back up.
Into like, as all of you that are on this call, when we talk about this, I mean, because I mentioned it this way, sometimes I don't necessarily write it down, but when you go into a business review with whoever it is, we probably all have a bit of an agenda in our heads. If we're not, sometimes I write it down, sometimes it goes on the agenda, but sometimes you kind of go, I want to make sure that whatever happens. And I think that's what we're getting at here is maybe how do we formalize that a little bit more and make it more deliberate than just like, yeah, I know, like I got one coming up in a week and I know I need them to understand how their LOB application on-prem is a problem. That is like my main agenda item. I don't care if they buy a thing from that whole thing. If they understand that at the end, then that's going to be very good and we'll move on from there. But I didn't write that anywhere. It's just, I know that. So
and
that's
sometimes
like
you don't even really want it in front of the customer, right?
Yeah.
You're almost looking for a private place to track Alex's goal versus the customer goal or the opportunity or something else, because sometimes your mission is not something you really want to come right out and say to your client.
And maybe you don't need to, and yeah, it's just one of those things where it's kind of like, I just need to make sure that I'm doing this. But that being said, that all goes into rating, a little bit of that QBR, because if I get that, like I said, everything else is just like icing. I'll be so happy if they can agree, like, yep, we see why this is a problem and we understand we need to fix it. Great. We can walk away now. I'm good. I'm all set.
Once you've made the sale, stop talking, right? Like that's,
yeah.
We actually talked about in the goal piece of customer success. I'm going to pull that screen up for folks that aren't familiar with it. In the goal piece, right, we have the ability to attach. So a few things. First, you can create goals, and this toggle here is a show the customer toggle or hide it from the customer. So we put the plumbing in the background already to start thinking about non-customer facing pieces. So the notion would be, and I know Trisha, I actually gave you the recommendation story that you quote, that you let me quote in the book. I talked about it last week. If we have these goals in here to be able to push them right into the agenda on the VCIO side of the house, and then track a score against tasks, recommendations, and contracts to say how complete we are toward that. You could look at really a completion status or some kind of score on the goal, whether we're achieving them or not achieving them. right? So it starts to get to some of the pieces of what's going to be customer facing, what's not customer facing, and how are we making progress toward that. So kind of linking all of those pieces to a meeting again to get to this upper level score. I had a question also around in stack alignment. Would there be a value? So right now we have the notion of pre-canning, creating a recommendation template, right? So email migration service, X, Y, or Z, pre-canned template. Would there be templates that should automatically be aligned to a stack component? So every time somebody's not aligned in MFA, it would just pull up the recommendation and say, did you want to add Cisco Duo here? I see Matt likes that idea. Yeah. Do you have more examples of that? I always use MFA as my sample story. I should beat a different drum, but MFA is important.
I want to be able to take an assessment item that I mark at risk and have it aligned to my stack. So as soon as I say an item is at risk, it automatically says that it's not aligned to my stack, or that, so if I don't have MFA in place, that's not aligned, or if I don't have a next generation firewall or any of those kinds of things, we should be able to track that back to whether it's aligned with the stack or not.
So Alex Farling, Lifecycle Alex, the other talks about being able to associate an assessment item to a stack item so that when you score it red, it would kind of trigger that it's not aligned in the stack. So we had kind of talked about that too, is making that. What we're trying to do is collect the requirements around if we want to score a QBR and we want to track a client's momentum over time, what data do we already have? And then what connections could we make? And I mean, those are two, Trisha, to your point, we could do that. We don't have that set yet, but we've got the data, right? We've got the assessment item and we've got the stack item. So we would need to create a mapping tool for it. But is that valuable for folks? Do they want to be able to turn that on? We've heard that before, so we know that one is. But as Alex and I go back and fight for priorities, we're trying to decide, do we need to make that happen? Is that the fastest way to kind of automate stack alignment?
I think it certainly helps with the stack alignment, and then the stack alignment does definitely show progress with customers and what customers are open to change and really care about technology, and meaning they're more profitable because they're doing the things you need to in order for your business to be able to support them efficiently.
So part of that kind of leads to one of the graphs or charts that I picture in my mind is to be able to track stack alignment over time to show that the percentage is going up. Because Joe talked about just because they're at a percent of your stack, they could still be stale. As a matter of fact, that's the exact word he used, is I want to see that they might be 75%. So I think that's fine because I've got people at 25. But the people at 25 were at 13 last time and they're going to be at 40 next time. There's momentum for that one, but that 75 has kind of gone stale and I need to be alerted that they've done nothing. Someone on this call before Shirley mentioned that you haven't, I think it was you, Trisha, we met with you every time, but you haven't bought a new non-MRR product from us in,
Yeah. And it also, that whole stack alignment in progress also goes back to the effectiveness of account managers and, it's a great, how am I managing my business tool?
So honestly, I think you might have access to my Google Doc already, because my next line is Abby, do you want to talk about how we want to compare these scores? And account manager is the first one up there. Yep, she's unmuting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, a big part of our struggle as we have kind of gone down this journey is what constitutes a good account manager. and what constitutes an effective account manager, and what do we need from a skill standpoint for those. So being able to look at the data and quantify it in a way that is objective and not subjective seems super valuable to us. In addition to that, when an account manager is being ineffective in moving something forward, whether that be a technology stack, whether that be getting the right person in the room, like that's when we want that red flag raised so we can come up with an action item associated with it. Maybe it's that Alex is just giving some feedback, or that he's attending the next QBR to kind of help push some like serious pieces of the technology that have stalled forward. Maybe it is a re-evolution of the plan. Like maybe for some reason this plan is just like not hitting a chord with the client, and we need to kind of go back to the drawing board, and like this is on us. We got to figure it out because our plan's not meeting their business needs. So like I think there's so many reasons that can happen. But we are starting to look for trends. Like are we seeing some of those same problems within the same vertical, or within the same account manager, or within the same like number of users? Like, I don't know, maybe at like over 50 users, we keep having the same problem where like we can't move these things forward. So by seeing those trends, we feel like we'll have a better opportunity to address them from a strategy level. Where right now, we're still kind of looking like client by client, and it just, it doesn't feel scalable to us. So, as we're looking for this trending data to help us make better decisions around QBRs.
And that actually leads to the question I wanted to follow back up with. That the question was, are we looking at having different groups for the QBR score, since we may have different cadence? So like by segment of client, are we seeing momentum, right? Are our annual folks actually doing anything?
Yeah.
We need to get in there differently. And also they asked about average, right? So what's the average? I know, Matt, you've talked about kind of benchmarking before of like, what's the average QBR score across this vertical, across across all of the clients type of thing, I think would be interesting. So account manager.
And Marnie, one other thing that we were talking about the other day was like, we're struggling with, our QBRs now more effective in person or remote, or does it even matter? But now that people have kind of like gone back, like what is the value of actually like sitting in the room with those decision makers versus not? Is it worth us traveling to clients for these, or is it not? Like, so we've started to kind of question some of that data too. And
if Andrew's engagement thing might, because Andrew said like, right, are they engaged or not? Like, does that make a difference if they're in person or not?
Right. Like if it stalls, do you need an in-person visit? Because we haven't done an in-person QBR in 2 years. Like, so like having access to some of that data just helps us inform better decision making, I think. So
my thinking I don't think that would be hard to do another data point inside the business review itself to say in person or virtual, to be able to any data point we've got. I see Alex nod his head. I was like, he's right next to me on my screen. So I'm like, okay, he took that as a yes too. If we could then toggle that off as a filter to be able to say, are we tracking instead? Oh, Ross, that's funny. So my son's school had a PTO meeting. I went looking for the Zoom link and it wasn't there. Why? Because it was in person. That is a very 2022 statement right there, Ross.
That is too funny.
That is fantastic. The meeting's been canceled. Oh, I'm sorry. The meeting's been held live. That's awesome. What other thoughts? So the notion is to get these scores, right? To be able to track, again, the beauty of the conversation that we had, I thought, was we have so many of the individual components that this is just tying a few more of them together and then tracking them, not just as a point in time, like the QBR score, right? We have all of this information. So if we can aggregate that into a single score, so Abby can manage by exception. I see a lot of things in the 80s, and here was a QBR in the 60s, right? Let's circle the wagons on that. And then the whole notion of momentum was like, let's track this over time again. So anybody that's not on a upward slope, we see a down red arrow, right? It's kind of time to jump in. Are there other pieces?
I think too, just, one of the things we talked about is like, sometimes you want to give attention to like the best clients that you don't know are best clients. Like, like if these people have taken every single recommendation that you've given them for 2 years, you just don't know it because you're not looking at data over a 2-year span. Like maybe that's somebody that Joe wants to call up and be like, thank you so much for your business and your partnership. And like it just is an opportunity to acknowledge a really good partner. And, we don't always, I think, take advantage of doing those things either. So
One of my favorite opportunities for that too is to just pick up the phone and have exactly that conversation
Yeah,
and lean into
absolutely.
it with. And you're such a wonderful partner to me. I wonder who else I know who might be a good partner to you. Tell me what your ideal referral client looks like, right?
Mhm.
How many of you have asked all of your clients that? So asking them that does two things. One, it lets you know who in your circle you can connect with, someone who pays you a lot of money, who you'd like to be in your good graces, right? But it also sets in their mind that, hey, Alex is running around thinking about me and who he might send me as a referral. I probably should do the same for him.
Mhm.
There's a lot to be said for setting that up and doing it proactively, just reaching out to your customer and going, hey, Bob, I know we've worked together for a long time and I never thought to say it, but I never thought to ask this. And I'm ashamed that it's taken me this long. I don't know what a really good referral looks like for you. You're a great partner of mine. You do everything I tell you to do. You follow the process. Like we would love to send some more people to work with people like you.
Mhm.
He
I
probably
think
knows
that-
people just like him who he could introduce to you, who would follow the process and do the thing and be a good customer.
I like the way
So
that triggers the reverse referral without necessarily having to ask. The other thing it makes me think is when we think about the quadrants, the people in the low value, low effort quadrants that might be growing their own business that maybe you weren't paying attention to because they were low
Mhm.
value, low effort for a while, but then you were watching their momentum and maybe tracking their growth too. And so like, wait a minute, this is suddenly becoming one of our high value, low effort, profitable clients. Yeah, let's go chase down more of them, right? Who in that lower quadrant's worth looking at with a closer eye.
Mhm.
I have made my way through our board. I'll check the back. I took a lot of notes. I'm like, is there anything we didn't say? Our other thought was, the other, I think, enhancement piece that Alex, you particularly made note of is to have standard comments as feedback to a recommendation. So would love thoughts on this. If you had say 5 canned responses to a recommendation. So they accepted, they considered, but declined it due to expense, or they weren't interested due to like, they didn't see the value of it. First, they flat out rejected it. If we could come up with canned internal responses to a recommendation, you could then say, what's our least popular, like MFA never gets accepted, or this client's always rejecting due to money, or this client's always rejecting due to they don't have time. Would that give insights?
well, I think what's been asked for a lot is the ability for a customer to accept or decline right in the presentation. And I think that's something that we need to add to presentation view. I think long-term, that's the nirvana for them. And then give the account manager a reason on the back end to go in after the fact and say, declined because choose an option or freehand text one. You don't ever want to put the account manager in the position where they have to type cheapskate in the presentation of the client, but they're going to use that option more often than not, right? So I think we need to do 2 things there. Give them the option to get an accept and decline right in front of the customer, and maybe accept, decline, defer to the future.
Defer, yeah.
And then and maybe like defer and schedule or something like that. Hey, I promise to commit to that one next quarter. We'll push it down the road, but this one I'm not promising to commit to. We need to just throw it out into infinite, but I promise to look at it later. I think all of those have value, but I think, yes, giving the account manager something that says, I can say why later on when I'm not under the gun and having somebody staring at my keystrokes would have some value.
Well, then you could report off of it if it was a pre-canned why, right? I mean, you could always
Right.
have a free-form notes field, but I think what we liked about the pre-canned is to be able to filter by like,
Yep.
no one is ever accepting our X security piece.
Yep.
So let's talk about the way we're positioning it. And maybe then the goal for the next time, to Abby's point, is we're going to educate them on the why of that particular part of our stack, because we're not selling it well. They probably just don't understand it.
We have a bad product. We're not good at selling it. Like there's something there that we need
Yeah.
to unpack as a leadership team, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you're kind of poking at, but also just being able to keep those I mean, we put a lot of recommendations on that we don't have any intention of closing right away, and that we want them out into the future. And we know we're going to probably have to touch on them multiple times, but being able to keep what's the thought at this meeting, and you know, tagging the time stamping it.
Okay.
You know, if you
You
combine
want
it
to
with
add notes, so I'd like to hear more about the notes piece. Like, is that tracked across the client, within a QBR, within a recommendation, all those things?
Yeah.
we're doing it within a
Yeah, we do
recommendation.
that.
And my question to you, Matt, on that is status of the recommendation enough for you to flag it and say, this is for future discussion, or this is, I want immediate action on it, or do we need something else to say that? Because I like the ability to build that, you know, 2-year roadmap, but I know I'm not going to ask my customer to say yes to something that I'm planning for March 2025. Right.
Right. Yeah. So we're using statuses so that we can easily filter down, because we're adding way more on there than you want to go look at one time. And I think that's only going to grow and not get smaller. So we're using status for that reason, but then we will forget what we talked about last time. So having that timestamp, we're currently just sticking that in the current notes at the top, you know, putting a date in the note, but we really want to keep that notes to the, you know, why are we suggesting this type of information, and separate those two.
We use the
So-
recommendations roadmap for that. So we keep the recommendations roadmap up front. We put dates on there and when we think they should be done. And we're talking about them in every single QBR. So we use current year plus 2 years. Because that gives us a really good, like, we know that we have a whole series of firewalls and Cisco switches that are all going end of life, plus 2012 is going end of life in 2023, right? So we've been really effective at moving some of those projects into 2022, where we could, so that we, you know, having those conversations and saying, look at what we're talking about for budget for 2023, because all of these things are coming end of life. Let's move some of these into your 2022 budget. But even if we're, you know, showing them what's going on in 2024, we're still talking and getting agreement that they need it, and that's the right time, and we're confirming it in every single QBR we do. And it's just a simple roadmap on there, roadmap item. We just cover that real quick at the beginning of every QBR.
Just a friendly reminder that this is out there and we've talked about it. I have to say, Alex and I did the budget boot camp this week, and yesterday the quote was, I ran that 2012 server report out of Lifecycle Insight and scared the crap out of my project manager today. They didn't realize they could do it in asset ad hoc, where they could see it across all their clients, and internally it just scared the team. So when you just said 2012 server, it made me think of that. If you haven't run that report, it could be happy holidays for your project manager.
Or maybe you wait till after Christmas.
Yeah, I was
to
like, maybe
set them
wait.
into an absolute heart attack. Yeah.
Yeah, no time like the present, or not. So you said a couple pieces there that make me think some additional tagging inside of recommendations makes sense, to be able to filter by recommendations, or, you know, to be able to sort, filter, swatch in the usual life cycling it, where we can color it and tag it, I think would be good.
So on that, the tagging, just to emphasize that, we've been finding ourselves trying to lean into more of separating the recommendations, or desire to, at least, between, is this a recommendation because of technology debt, and it's just you need to do it because of life cycle stuff, or is it because of a new reason? And we've been trying to, we kind of came up with this in a presentation for last week, but telling people there's 3 reasons you're doing it. It's either for security reasons, availability, or productivity. and be able to tag every recommendation into one of those buckets so that we can separate them out and remind people why they're doing them.
So Joe actually talks about momentum toward the core product, right? Like a good client is one that does all the core pieces, and then gave an example of a client that wanted something for productivity purposes. They weren't going to not be a client if they couldn't fix that problem for them right away, but that wasn't a core, like they weren't in a panic that they weren't going to be secure and scalable. So I like those three. I always say secure, stable, and supportable. But I think the productivity piece is kind of got to Joe's point of, all right, that's not core. We want to do it. It's a good project for them. It's not going to burn down the house if it does that, if that one didn't happen today. So I feel like the fact that people joined the call, stayed on the call, and we took a whole nother noteboard of notes is probably a good sign that a lot of these pieces and parts, tying them up together makes sense. Are there any favorites? Like, ooh, if you could do this first. Alex and I take votes. We don't always win, but we take them.
True story.
And then Alex, Joe, and Abby, was there anything new to, I feel like the conversation very much aligned with the way we talked yesterday. Were there any new 2 days ago? I rewrote the notes yesterday.
Listen, now from my perspective, I mean, I think that, it sounds like, generally speaking, people are on the same page as far as, how do we take that macro level view and use it effectively. So it's reassuring to know we're not completely out of left field.
Oh, you're the only
Not
one.
completely.
Right. Partially is fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I thought, like I said, we have talked about a lot of these pieces, but pulling it together with the notion of getting insights into momentum and tracking across account managers and verticals just ties it together and gives that management view instead of the one view at a time, right? I feel like when we went from tracking one asset at a time to aggregating it into one place, that was this first level. Now we're going from one QBR at a time to aggregating it to a different level. It always levels it up so you get more insights. So.
I completely agree. And I think the interesting thing is, like all of this, as you guys are probably astutely aware, is that, it's a progression along, this life cycle of getting good at this. And I think the cool thing is I can't even really quantify it, but I've got this idea that like, this is going to open up the next door, like it's going to create that visibility that I think somebody mentioned on, then how do you go then? So once you establish the value proposition of managing across it and standardizing and making sure your teams are working effectively and your clients are happy, okay, what's the next value add? And it feels like this is a measure of how you quantify what's happening to be able to judge what's next. So I don't know. Like I said, I'm not saying it very well, but it feels like it's the right thing towards even the next step, which is just that never-ending value add building process.
Just this morning, Alex and I were talking about KPIs around account management, VCIOs, VCISOs, VT, like whatever letters you want to slap together. So some of these pieces definitely track toward KPIs on that side of the house that are not done automatically, right? That are some more, maybe not even contemplated right out of the gate because it's not easy to track. But if you could track, do I have momentum with my customers? And establish that as a KPI for someone, that's a pretty powerful driver.
Make a difference.
And it's interesting because folks often on the customer side of the house aren't necessarily coin operated the same way that salespeople are. So when you've got account manager folks that do want to gain momentum because it's better for the client, that feels right to them because they know it's I'm driving that value for them and therefore for the company.
Well, and then it also gives those account managers, it's one of those things where sometimes you kind of go like, maybe, how do I know if I'm doing a good job? Like how, even just myself, like, I mean, you have that review with your manager if you're somebody at a certain point and like, they tell you how they think you're doing, but like, wouldn't it be nice if you could see that while you're working through it? So you're kind of like, okay, I'm hitting the things, the objectives, all those things that we want to do as an account manager or whatever you have. So, that would be there. It would, you know, I guess we've been talking about that a lot as I've been, you know, managing these other account managers, kind of like what is our priority? And our priority for me is getting these QBRs in there and making sure you're delivering the value. But we have to fight with other things like, oh, this thing is broken or that. And it's kind of like, yes, that's all fine. But like, and we have to deal with that at a certain point, but we have to make sure we don't lose sight of the fact that
eye on the prize.
this is the most important thing and this needs to be your priority. Like if they're having issues with the service, then you talk to your service manager and like let them deal with that. That like I know we are that liaison to that client as well, but you really got to try to like move yourself out of that hey, I'm that person and
not the fixer. You're the facilitator, which is a different conversation.
It's been a little difficult for the team a little bit. We're getting there, but it's tough.
Well, and I think we struggle a lot in this industry with names of roles and who's responsible for what and what falls in whose camp. I think it's important not to so much stress out on the name. And this is a conversation I'm having with another one of our partners at a really large MSP, but for leadership to really break it out and say, you know, this is the process for having a technical conversation or a service delivery conversation. And leadership has to separate that out and say, this is service delivery's responsibility, not the VCIO's responsibility. If we screw up service delivery, get the service manager on the call because they're the one who can fix that. You know, it's really easy for us to, as account managers or as VCIOs, walk in and just get slaughtered over this service delivery thing, let it derail a whole meeting and put us in a bad spot. When really what we should have done is said, you know what, you're absolutely right. I could see where that would frustrate you. I'm not the right person to fix that, but I will facilitate the call on which we can resolve this. I'll get that person on a call with you. It'll probably take 15 minutes for you guys to actually get to the bottom of this, but we'll ruin this whole meeting if we go down that trail. And I think that's something that we're shy to do, but I think it's something we should really seriously think about and be better about as an industry.
No.
And that stems from like we all started as two-man shops where it was all our responsibility.
Right, it was your responsibility.
Yeah, I mean,
I handed off the hat, but I was struggling to let go of it. Yeah.
Yep.
I am. So Joe, Abby, Alex, thank you so much for joining, and thank you for having the conversation, because we've definitely talked pieces and parts of this along the way. So to have a framework to pull all of them together, and I appreciate everybody that chimed in. I will add.
These conversations are fantastic. They make all of us better, right?
That we this really does make us better. So we kind of will help prioritize with product where this pushes to. So thank you all for joining. Hope everybody has a great weekend. Sorry, it took 3 extra minutes today, but enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.